All right. Good morning, everybody. We're going to get this panel session underway. Connecting Vehicles and Infrastructure is the title of this session, just to make sure you're in the right place. My name is Axel Threlfall, editor-at-large at Reuters. This, of course, is a subject that has received a great deal of attention and generated a great deal of heated debate over the past few years, and is unsurprisingly a narrative that is moving very, very fast indeed. Few of us can deny the enormous transformative potential on offer here in safety, in mobility, in proficiency, in productivity, etc., etc. The implications, the challenges, as well as the opportunities for automakers, for parts makers, for road authorities, for infrastructure operators, for telecom companies. That list is growing longer and longer. Of course, are far-reaching, but do need to be carefully managed. And we will talk about the management of all of that today. This session is going to focus both on vehicle-to-vehicle as well as vehicle-to-infrastructure connectivity technologies, what all of this means for passenger as well as freight traffic. We're going to touch on the critical issues of level playing fields in governance, of coordination of all the different players involved in this. We'll touch on safety as well as funding sources for implementation. So lots to talk about. In fact, one of the best descriptions I read on my way over here of this move from autonomous cars to connected vehicles was this idea that it's going to transform the system, and I quote here, from a swarm of autonomous cars that merely tolerate each other to an orchestrated transportation machine. I thought that worked quite well. Right, let me introduce our speakers. We're going to have a chat amongst ourselves for about 45 minutes or so, probably just a little bit over that, and then I do want to open it up to you, the audience. So have a think about what you want to ask this esteemed panel. Let me introduce them. At the far end there is Christoph Bergdold, Vice President Products and Technology, the ITS division of Schwarco. Next to him is Patrick Malajak, Secretary General of the World Road Association. Shailen Bhatt is President and CEO of ITS America. And next to me is Jean-Baptiste Bourcha, Manager at Sustainable Development and External Affairs Department of Valeo. So welcome, gentlemen, to all of you. And apologies that this is an all-male panel, just right at the top there. Let me ask you to start, Christoph, let's start with you and we'll go around. Just a few words on your role, the organization for which you work, and how you fit into this particular context. So set the scene from your perspective for us, if you like.
Yes, thank you, Axel. Schwarco is a 50-year-old company in the environment of road marking and intelligent traffic transport systems. I'm personally heading the product and technology department in Schwarco, which contains the whole B2B business with the whole portfolio, the software and the product development, and the business development, sales, plus technology and innovation. We are in 5 market segments in smart mobility, which is starting with our core market, urban traffic management. The second one is interurban highway and tunnel infrastructure with SCADA systems. The third one is parking with parking guidance systems and parkhouse management. The next one is e-mobility with loading stations and back office systems for payments. And last but not least, public transport with the IT onboard unit infrastructure of buses and trams and the command and control center of public transport operations, again connected to urban traffic command and control centers for public transport priority, for example. This is a wide range. We call it smart mobility, not smart city. That would contain also building technology where we are not inside. And we are heavily working together with the automotive industry as well as with the municipalities and governments on connected, cooperated autonomous mobility, specifically autonomous driving and new innovative mobility services and also new business models. And that's why it's a pleasure to be here and be part of this round. Thank you.
Just as a little taster, Christoph, just give us a sense of what you think is the biggest challenge that this sector, that this subject, this topic faces right now, that we're clearly going to be talking about over the next hour and a half. Very quickly, biggest challenge.
I think it's the digitalization and the trends behind of it, and the main start point is open data. We are talking here today about very closed infrastructure and systems with closed regulation and standardization and interfaces. And to come to the next level, we need open data, open standard interfaces, etc., to come to new business models, to increase the possibilities of value-added services. And that's where we are working and helping on.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Patrick Malajak from the WRA.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. So WRA, World Association, we are mostly a member, an association of member governments, 122 governments, but we also involve private sector, private operators of motorways and roads in our activities, and we are focused on knowledge exchange. We produce reports, organize seminars, with a focus on low and middle income countries, but not only that. And we cover the whole range of topics that are related to roads, infrastructure, road safety, adaptation to climate change, organization of transport administrations, and a lot. Among others, we organize a congress every 4 years, and the next one will take place at the end of this year in October in Abu Dhabi. Some of you may be familiar with that process. So that's who we are. As regards connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles, we have 2 task forces made up of experts from all over the globe, organizing surveys and sharing best practice between road organizations about what they should get ready for and actually what they are learning from their trials and pilots.
Okay. Patrick, thank you very much indeed. Shailin Bhatt, President CEO of ITS America. You've worn a number of hats over the years, and in fact, we first met 6 years ago on a different panel here in Leipzig. Go ahead, Shailin.
Yeah, thank you, and it's great to be back here. You know, I have worn a number of hats, and 6 years ago I was the Secretary of Transportation in Delaware for the state of Delaware. Before that I was at US DOT, and then I went to the Colorado Department of Transportation to be the director of the Colorado DOT before I took this job as ITS America. And over the past 10 years, we always talk about in the United States towards 0 deaths. And over the past 10 years, we've gone the exact opposite way. So when I became the director in Colorado, my first year there were 484 fatalities on our system. When I left 3 years later, we were at 715 and still climbing. And so I took this job at ITS America because I believe that technology is the best tool in our toolbox to reduce fatalities on our system, to reduce the amount of time that we spend sitting in traffic and congestion, and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the system. And so statistically, we have 2 million crashes a year in the United States, 90% of those caused by human error. And US DOT NHTSA believes that 80% of them can be eliminated or reduced. 80% of the unimpaired crashes can be reduced through connected vehicle technologies. So ITS America is an association, ERTICO is the representative here in Europe, and then ITS Asia Pacific, that is a mix of public sector agencies, private sector companies, and academia, all focused on this idea of reducing the impacts of transportation through connected vehicles.
But safety for you and for what you're doing now is the end game. That's where all your focus is.
100%. I think it is. Just imagine if somebody came to this conference and said, I've come up with this new invention, it'll kill 38,000 people in the United States every year, and millions of people worldwide, but here are all the benefits of it, we would throw them out. We would say, take your invention away, but somehow we accept these terrible statistics. But I think that we're on the cusp of a new future in which vehicles speaking with each other, vehicles communicating with infrastructure is going to greatly reduce these crashes, and all we need to do now is move forward with conviction.
Good. Thank you, Sharon. Jean-Baptiste, from Valeo, you are the producer of a lot of these parts, of course, but what's critical for you and your company is you need to know the how. You need to know that context. You need to understand the regulation. You need these things to move quickly. Just tell us a little bit about your company, your role, and what you find is the biggest challenge.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Yes, I'm working for Valeo, which is a Tier 1 supplier. We are among the top 10 suppliers worldwide. We're a 19 billion sales company. Clear focus on R&D. We are the first patent filer in France and among the top 15 in Europe. And 50% of the sales that we have last year are originating from products that did not exist 3 years ago. So it's a clear R&D and innovation focus of Valeo. Just in 1 second, what we're doing, we have two main axes. The one is electrification with the inventor of the stop-start, and today we have the complete range of solutions for electrification of vehicles. We're not a battery producer, but we're doing all the systems around that make you having an electric vehicle. And the other one is automated and connected driving. So this is the two constant strategic axes we have, and based on that, we are willing more and more, being a B2B player, to open a little bit box and to think about and create new businesses around that. And in that sense, digitalization and connectivity is really a big issue for us, because this will really enable us as a B2B to propose a smart solution for mobility. So you've mentioned it before. The big challenge for us is to see when, how, and under which condition you will have win-win ecosystems that are starting to exist in Europe, in the US, in Asia, where all the players around, based on connectivity between infrastructure and vehicles, can exist to propose valid solutions where we all can find a gain. And being a listed company in a business that is very much looking on financial returns and so on, this is a big issue for us, clearly.
Okay. All right, very good. Thank you to all of you for laying out those thoughts. Right, look, I want this to be as organic a conversation as possible, but I just to provide a little bit of structure, I am going to follow several themes, and the last theme, the theme we will end up with, is the governance theme. The the who owns the data, who pays for the infrastructure, who's really going to see this through at the end of the day. But I want to start with performance improvement. And Patrick, let me kick it off with you here, because one thing that I was mulling on my way over here was, does the infrastructure enable the connectivity, or does the connectivity then enable and improve the infrastructure? You know, which way round does it work? I imagine it's both ways, but just run us through, Patrick, the importance of a reliable, of a resilient infrastructure, and to what extent is that too often overlooked right now?
Thank you, Axel. As you said, it goes both ways. In many scenarios, infrastructure enables connectivity. There are other scenarios with vehicle-to-vehicle communications that do not involve infrastructure. And those are very viable scenarios as well, but it's quite likely that in long-term infrastructure will be involved. But vice versa, I would say that connectivity enables infrastructure as well, especially road infrastructure. If you compare this session today with probably the similar session 5 years ago, probably you wouldn't have invited roads. We were the bad guys. In those days, what mattered was to shift traffic, passenger or freight, to rail or other modes of transportation. I think those are still valid objectives in themselves, but we've come to a realization that traffic in many countries around the world relies on road infrastructure, 80% in some countries, for example. So I would say that connectivity now enables a renaissance of infrastructure. But back to what we can do, there are many scenarios in which connectivity will, of course, have a significant contribution on road safety. There are many services that exist that can be marketed, but also has an impact on the management of the road network. Delivering information to traffic information in vehicles, getting advanced information about traffic conditions, delivering information about weather conditions. This has will have an impact on the day-to-day business of road operators. It may even have an impact longer term, because we will get access to better data, more accurate data, more up-to-date data on road conditions. So we will know where it is more of a priority to invest on maintenance. So yes, connectivity will enable infrastructure as well as infrastructure already enables connectivity.
You know, I'm going to ask anyone to jump in on this point, but just very quickly, Patrick, okay, 5 years ago you were the bad guys. What changed? Or did we just carry on as we were and there was this realization that things weren't going to change that quickly?
I think anyone's input is welcome on this one. A realization, certainly, and realization that insufficient levels of on investment on roads. Sorry, I'm talking about roads, but that's what I do for a living. Insufficient levels of investment on roads were becoming visible. There's just a figure from the G20 group of countries and the Global Infrastructure Hub that they looked at infrastructure investment needs over 2016 to 2040, and they found out that the needs were $34 trillion, whereas in planned investments were more around 26. There's a significant shortfall. And in many countries, there are surveys, as recently as this morning in France, about what citizens and taxpayers' expectations, and road infrastructure comes not maybe on top, but it's a significant one.
Yeah. Sharon, coming in.
Yeah, and I think that I think part of that renaissance, if you will, is this idea that as a former transportation operator, we're starting to move from talking in conversations about moving cars and trucks and talking about moving people. And I think that now with technology and data and connectivity, we're finding that we can be much more efficient in the way that we move people. And just on the point of operating efficiency, and again, I'll just cite the United States figures. So Americans sit for 95 hours a year in traffic. And we know this now because a data company has actually mapped it. It's not an estimate. We're not sort of surveying people. We know based on data collection that Americans sit for 95 hours a year in traffic. But over 55% of the congestion on the system comes from non-recurring incidents. So it's not a bottleneck. It's not, a deficiency in the network. It's a crash. It's a fire. It's a visual friction point, and everybody slows down. And so I would agree that the next evolution in terms of moving people is getting that data to the people through this connected infrastructure and vehicle ecosystem so they can make better decisions on the front end so we're not sitting in traffic.
Chris.
Yes, I want to step on the point with a safety perspective, because it's for sure it's both ways in the data exchange, but at the end, from a safety perspective, the infrastructure has the last word. Everybody knows that. He's driving after his navigation. The navigation says 120, but the traffic sign says 80, and then you have an enforcement photo. So the infrastructure is setting the standard. Another example I want to give is we are establishing the traffic lights, the controllers, and the command and control center software. And from a traffic controller perspective, when we test them, there are always two people in the field, testing the information, the message from the traffic controller, and another one is standing in front of the traffic light if it's really red. And in the next years, the infrastructure will play a key role from a safety perspective. Another point for 5 years ago, and the road administration, why this role changed, is a very nice example with ASFINAG in Austria. They are always talking about their customers, about our car, when we are driving our car. In Germany, nobody has realized that these are customers yet, and there's no road operation, central operation organization also not established. They are talking about it. But that's a quite interesting point. And then when you are talking about your customer, and the customer has a lot of deliverables, so to say, then you can make a circle and bring all on the table and talk openly about it, and that's a good point. Yeah.
Jean-Baptiste, where is the biggest opportunity for Valeo? When you hear us talking about infrastructure, you hear us talking about the connectivity piece as well. And yes, you're the provider of a lot of these parts that need to work together with the infrastructure. Where's the most opportunity for you?
If you allow me, just on your question, infrastructure, is that what? There it is. It's working? No.
There you go.
Oh. Thank you.
Yep.
Working? Yes.
Yep, we got it.
Okay. Just to come back on your question, is connectivity pushed by infrastructure
Yep.
and vice versa? If you allow me, just to open the box and to think a little bit of what's happening regarding electrification. Well, you also have this debate of saying, will the charging points infrastructure push for more electrification or not, or should we have more BEV vehicle on the road and then we will have infrastructure going on? So you have roughly the Tesla model, where the company is saying, well, if I want to have my vehicle on the road, I will create an infrastructure. And then you have the automotive sector today that is more and more investing in energy companies to work on that. But if you think about the big difference, is that it's really difficult to have a good understanding of the scalability of this infrastructure that is needed to create business models behind. It's really easy for electrification. You have to map and to evaluate how many charging points you need based on the number of vehicles that you have on the road. But for connectivity, as you have many solutions behind, many business models are existing, many offers that could exist on 5G infrastructure and so on, that it's really difficult to measure and to evaluate the level of the infrastructure you should deploy and roll out in a given timing. And that's the big issue if you're thinking about how to plan the infrastructure, because you have no certain, it's not really clear how to understand the different business models that could exist. And I think all the players in the ecosystem, should they be from the automotive sector or for the mobile network operators or road operators and so on, they all have this issue because sharing the cost of investing is not very clear because the business model behind is not so clear.
Yeah, and as I said, we'll come on to governance and to who pays for this in a moment. But just to that point, Shailin, I want to get your perspective on this because I know that you have issues with based on what automakers or whether they're joining your program, the ITS program in America, or pulling out of that program. A lot of that is dictated by how well the FCC communicates with the Department of Transport, and the Department of Transport communicates back to the corporates and the auto manufacturers, et cetera, et cetera. Talk to us a little bit about the lack of communication or coordination.
Yeah, so just for some background, in 1999, ITS America petitioned to have the 5.9 gigahertz band set aside for vehicle-to-vehicle communications. And so that has been the place within the spectrum where these vehicles will talk to each other, vehicles will speak to infrastructure, and you've had this sort of chicken or egg argument for a long time. Is it the infrastructure that needs to talk to the vehicles? Is it the vehicles that need to speak to the infrastructure? And we're finally at an inflection point where when you go across the United States now, in New York City, in Las Vegas, in Tampa, virtually everywhere across the country, you actually have infrastructure out there that now will communicate. What we need now are the vehicles to come along, and what is happening now is because of the uncertainty and perhaps some unfortunate communication. I'll give you one example. Toyota last year announced that they were going to deploy DSRC across their entire fleet in the United States starting in 2022, and then 2 FCC commissioners sent a letter to them saying, we're not sure if that's a good investment. And so what happens is, you get people saying, well, there's no deployments, there's nothing going on there. A company says they're going to deploy, and then they get told, I wouldn't deploy, and then we get told, well, there's no deployments. And you see this cycle going on. And so in terms of communication, I think it was good to see Secretary Chow last week reach out and say, hey, before you take action, FCC, let's take a pause. But I think what is needed is just a clear directive that says, we know we need to reduce fatalities. This is the technology that will help reduce those fatalities. And let's make it a public mandate that we're going to put safety first.
Just to put you on the spot, Patrick, who's best in class in this communication coordination race? Who's doing it well, would you say?
I guess I cannot name names, but our members cover the whole world, I would say, more or less, and we see very good examples coming out of Asia. I would mention South Korea and Japan seem to be doing a very good job of coordinating across agencies and operating pilots and trials and learning from the experience. But that goes back a long time in Japan. For example, with the VIX system in the 90s, that was a good learning experience. But that's just a quick answer. But what I would like to say is that almost all region of the world is trying it. In Europe, which maybe I should have included in my first answer, there are lots of cooperative ITS pilots and trials, and many countries are involved, and many are learning from this. But something I would like to touch upon, but maybe not for now, and if we have the time for a later discussion, safety is the first and foremost objective in many countries, of course. And in my organization, we totally second that, and we try to contribute the best we can, delivering improved traffic services and contributing to environmental issues solutions, of course, matters a lot. But we shouldn't forget about other parts of the world. Low-middle-income countries as well. They contribute in a way. They suffer the most from road fatalities and casualties and injuries. And one of the questions that we should address, I think, as a community, is how can we leverage those technologies and those governance processes, maybe, if it comes to that, with those countries as well.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I'm going to come on to with you, Christophe, in just a second on building user trust, because I think this is important, especially when you talk about customers and clients, and bring the business logic into this as well. But very quickly to finish up on the safety piece, Shaylin, how much more sophisticated can all of this get? How much more sophisticated does it need to get, and how far off is that, would you say?
So if you if you think about if anybody's driven from, say, anywhere in the United States, from New York to Los Angeles, the interstate that you drive on when you drive in New York State or Washington, D.C., is the exact same across the country. We have standardized it. So the speeds are all standardized, the curves are standardized. If you leave the road, there's a clear zone, the signs break away. So we have engineered as much safety as we can into the roadways. If you look at cars today, they have crumple zones. They're made of lighter materials. They have airbags, side impact airbags. You're getting automated emergency braking, things like that. So we've engineered a lot of safety into the cars themselves. They're the safest they've ever been. But why are fatalities going up? It's because what we need now is this connected vehicle technology. That is the next frontier. That is where we'll be able to get this. However, what we're going to have to make sure that we do very well is, to the extent that these become systems of systems, and all of these vehicles and infrastructure are communicating and relying with each other, cybersecurity becomes a big issue, and one I don't think that we talk enough about when we talk about all of the benefits of these connected systems.
Well, let's bring that into building user trust, because I think that's a big part of that. How well are we doing generally on building user trust as this debate moves forward? And how big a piece of that is a fear of cyber attack, a fear of stuff going wrong, basically?
Well, from a cybersecurity perspective, we have to see that today we are working in a very closed infrastructure. We see the first hackers attacking these closed infrastructures as a championship, so to say. On the other side, when we are going in open data, reliable data, fast infrastructure, also real-time data environments and open systems through this, the cyber security is increasing heavily. And when we look at this point today, I think it's more a cultural than a technology point. We see that normally when we are dealing with cyber security attacks, we are reactive. So when the incident has happened, we are very happy when we found the incident and solved it after 2 hours, 2 days, or whatever. We never and this is, check it in your own organization, we never think about preventive cybersecurity. And this is possible from a technology perspective, because it's quite simple. You can track the trends of hacks in the world and the region and the markets and the industries, and then mirror these hacks against your infrastructure and see exactly where your gaps are. And this is already a good approach to prevent the infrastructure against cyber attacks. But the thinking behind of it, thinking preventive, thinking faster than the reactive mode is a cultural issue, and I think we are far away from it.
You know, with a layperson's hat on, because that's what I am in this discussion. I mean, the thing that sticks in my mind, you know, when I speak to government, cyber experts, to the governance people, is that the bad actors are going to be 5 steps ahead always, and that ain't going to change. How do you get across that message to the user that it's going to be okay?
When you take a simple example with your home your personal home, the police gives you the advice to be a little bit better than the last in the run, because then the guy goes to the next house already. So it's not about being now 5 years in advance of what perhaps could happen. It's just to think preventive, be prepared, and be a little bit more proactive about it. That's already a big jump to what's existing today.
But we are at the mercy of big central systems here, aren't we? Sorry, go ahead, Shannon, and then Patrick.
Yeah, I would just say quickly, everybody in this room is in transportation. Just over a year ago in Tempe, Arizona, you had a pedestrian killed in a tragic accident where the Uber vehicle hit the lady crossing the street. There was one fatality where the system did not perform properly. And it set back AV's deployment by about a year. It froze the market for a year, at least in the United States. I can't speak globally, but massive, massive implications. That was a computer making a mistake, not recognizing a pedestrian, safety driver not engaging, and so that's what caused that tragedy. Imagine what will happen to this market when the first cyber attack occurs and somebody dies because a government agency or a private sector company or some combination thereof was hacked, because it is the #1 target. And what are the market ramifications? What are the implications for cities and transport systems that are completely connected? Because you'll get that huge shift of public opinion again saying, all these great ideas, and then it'll be, what idiot thought this was a good idea? Right. And so we need to be very aware and very engaged now on getting the public awake to the fact that, you know, banks have been hacked, governments have been hacked, the transportation system will be hacked. We just need to be ready to say these are all the benefits, and this is why we have to be eyes wide open. You know, I don't want to open up a totally different can of worms here, but it's amazing how little we talk about this sort of thing in aviation, isn't it? You know, given you know, autopilot systems, and again, I've got a layperson's hat on here, so apologies for my ignorance, but we don't talk that much about cyber attacks in aviation, do we? Not to get off topic here, but there are some parallels, but it's not completely analogous because you have limited points of entry into the system. You have a set number of planes. The systems are, you know, it's just harder to access. When you think about 300 million vehicles in the fleet in the United States, it's a lot of entry points. All of the public sector agencies, all of the cameras and ITS equipment, all you need is one way in. So it's just not, it's a little more, it's a little easier to get in. Okay, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't say I really support this explanation. There are 2 more elements I think that maybe could be holding back the markets and customers of services. One is data protection, which is, of course, a hot topic in different countries. We are in Europe here, and especially in Germany. And in Germany, this is really a very important issue. And maybe in other parts of the world, not yet, but this is emerging even in the US from what we hear. So customers are becoming wary and wary about having their location made available with no limits, or with limits that they thought were there, but actually were not there. So that's really part of the equation. But mostly, I think, early adopters, it's who wants to be an early adopter, because it's not very clear, at least for customers now, which technologies are going to be the ones that will be used and that will be implemented 5 years down the line. Who wants to invest in Betamax now if 2 years later it's going to be VHS all over? This is where it goes back to governance and trying to set examples and confirming that, yes, this is what we confirm will be made available for the next 20 years.
Yeah, Jean-Baptiste.
Yes, just on cyber. The way we see today the evolution of automated and connected driving is not the same that we had, the vision we had a few years ago. So it's not really, I mean, there are different visions, but don't think that you will have lots of level 5 automated vehicle on the road and so you have as many entry points for cyber attacks. I mean, certainly people having completely level 5 vehicles will be fleet operators. So this means that they will reinforce the cybersecurity aspect because they are owning a fleet and it's their core business, their core assets, so they will really be sure that it's safe. And for the others, you have many possibilities also today where we think about having constantly teleoperation behind level 4 vehicles for example, private owners and so on, which means that you have a kind of redundancy, another way to monitor the vehicle and to control, which could be also hacked. I totally agree with that, but it's also a way to see it that. And a third point also on that, I would just maybe give a sort of reassuring message. It's also the way you will share data. Today you have countries already using central servers where you collect all the data. This case of China, for example, with the new energy vehicles, where all the data related to energy management, pollutions, and so on are collected from new energy vehicles in China. So this is a way of gathering all the data, and this could be also expanded to provide additional safeguards on cyber. And in Europe, this is also a discussion that is taking place, where you're also exploring the fact of having a central server that is collecting data and so on. Could be also hacked, I agree. But this is a way to see other elements that can contribute to create a kind of additional safety, redundancy, and additional safeguards on those cyber aspects.
Okay, Jean-Baptiste, thank you very much indeed. I want to move on to building a business case for this. And we talk about passenger traffic and safety, et cetera, et cetera. But what about the business case and the cost effectiveness of this when it comes to freight, logistics, supply chains, et cetera, et cetera? How big a part of the overall discussion is that for you now? So let's start with Swaco and Valio, and then move on to the others.
We see, first of all, from Swaco perspective, we are also creating or developing new business model from a classical project to a cloud solution, transaction-based payment, as a service, etc. And on the other side, we have the public-private partnerships. We have infrastructure funding programs, etc. We have a lot of possibilities. But when we closely look at it, there are other regulations which fence it again a little bit. So, for example, the municipalities are not allowed in some areas and countries to rent hardware. They have to buy it. They have to own it. So this excludes already a cloud modeling kind of a way. Public-private partnerships, some have good experience, more have bad experiences, a lot of risk on the private side. Something to be improved. On the business model side, for sure, are opportunities to finance the whole infrastructure because the municipalities are lacking of budget. We have a very good example here in Germany ongoing with the diesel scandal and the CO2 issue, where the government provides infrastructure subventions when you have a solution for the CO2 problem, and we developed a specific solution for giving more green light on the intersections when we come to a critical CO2 measure with a CO2 measure on the intersection, and that is a good solution. So the city gets the investment money from the government, and this is increasing heavily the infrastructure also from a CO2 footstep. That's just an example. And thinking about how we are using shared mobility in the future from a traveler perspective, it's the same thing. When I'm leaving my home and talking with my family, what is the best usage of which kind of mobility coming from A over B to C? At the moment, it's more, okay, fastest, but in the future, it will be how it will be the low CO2 effect. Yeah. And this could be then a funded program from the government. If the citizen makes it CO2 positive, then he gets a benefit, tax payback or something like that. So a lot of possibilities to increase the solutions and the infrastructure on both sides.
Okay, Patrick.
Yeah, I think it's really an excellent question, that of business models, and it's a new topic for road operators. Building and maintaining roads used to be simple. Now there's, well, not that simple, but now there's many actors in the field, and the value chain has become really complex. And road operators are very much aware that they are part of that now. What they are wondering about, and there are trials about it, which is a good thing, is, okay, what is exactly their role in there? You just mentioned reduction of CO2 emissions, better traffic, of course, significant improvements in road safety. Is that monetized somehow? And how does that impact budget operations for road operators? Because if we talk about roadside units, for example, someone has to pay for that. And and that investment decision has to be substantiated. How do we do that? So my colleagues in PIAC are very much involved in those discussions. But it's a new job for us. How to be part of that. OEMs, for example, have had a long history of discussing with car manufacturers. For us, we're learning about that, and that's really, really essential.
And you know, you've reminded us, of course, that you're a publicly listed company. You know, this is a lot of the viability of R&D and et cetera, you know, is based on that business, the viability of the business model and what clients are going to say to you on whether this is going to be worth it for them or not. To what extent is that a top driver of what you're doing now?
Yes, indeed. Financial markets doesn't follow you if you have no order intake and you're just paying for R&D, clearly. Well, there are business models existing already today. It was my entry point of the discussion, speaking about business models, but there are some of them existing today, about where fleet management, for example, is a good example of a market which you could implement solution based on connectivity, for example, know exactly where the vehicles are and have repaired maintenance solutions behind and so on. This is already existing, already working, and it's launched also from a B2C perspective for fleet management. We have developed, for example, a virtual key, so you can just exchange a key via your smartphone. You don't have to go to the rental agency and so on. So it's all existing, but for having market, you need to identify the customers and the size of the market. So this is a bit the issue behind who are the customers. So on those local levels, it's working. Then if you go further, I mean, for me, the way we see it is also to engage with cities, and then you have the question that were raised before of how we finance that and what are the benefits for the city and are they ready to finance that. I think clearly you have the possibility to subsidize that, but it shouldn't be the only solution because this is not really sustaining a business. At the end, regulation can push because then it creates a market, and here CO2 is a good example. I think we should recarbon that and really think about solution and integrate that in the road mapping exercise that are going to start or have already started in shared ecosystems. I mean, you need to put everybody around the table and start to have a look on how in this road mapping exercise you don't just make big, nice roadmaps, but you integrate also first examples of concrete example of what is done. And I fully agree with on the point raised about the discussion with the road operators that we are having in my company also, and from at national level or European level, we're very much involved in that with the Commission. It's really interesting because we're discovering words that we were not used to look at before, and it's really opening the discussion about how to create a way to bring all the people to work together. And here you should have a discussion of really, I would say it's the message we try to have and to develop with the Commission, for example, and having everybody on board and think about all the aspects. You should not just discuss about, we are funding small business models. It's really having regulatory aligned with financing tools and so on. So you're not blocked on the fact that saying for example, in this city, they don't want to buy hardware, which is a big issue. But at the end, if you have a bigger scale, I mean, and a bigger vision, this can be solved, I think.
All right. And that sort of brings us to the overall governance piece. I mean, look, there are a lot of transport ministers at this event this week. And it seems to me that for policymakers, you know, there are a couple of big questions, and tell me if I'm wrong, but, you know, one, you know, how do you ensure standardization? You know, how do you ensure that the tech is interoperable and available at a competitive price? It's got to be worth me paying for it, and it's going to work once I've paid for it. Shailin, let me start with you. These are clearly the big issues that policy has to throw around. How close are we getting now to this?
So I think obviously the technology is maturing. What is completely changing is this dynamic of infrastructure owner and operators. You know, I would agree for 100 years it was very easy, relatively speaking. You went out, you built a road, you built a bridge, and then cars and vehicles showed up to operate on them. I'll give you one example. In Colorado, where I was the Secretary of Transportation for a few years, we have 3 deployments of V2X on the system. Two on I-25, one on I-70. Excuse me, one on I-25, one on I-70, and one on C-470. The one on I-25 will have DSRC units. Sorry, will have DSRC units. The one on C-470 does have DSRC units, and the one on I-70 has dual DSRC and CV2X units, because in the time it took us to procure the contract, build the project, from the full phase, CV2X went from nothing to being a real thing. And so how do governments that have procurement laws that are designed to not move quickly, right? We design procurement laws so that we don't chase the latest flavor of the day. And yet in this tech world, what was goodbye 6 months ago is goodbye 6 months later. And so this is a new model, and you talked about the business model piece. I think this is an opportunity. We spend about $90 billion a year on infrastructure in the US, and I think that the next generation of this is a public-private partnership in which we're not asking governments to go out and invest all of the money, because not only do you have to put the roadside unit out, then you have to maintain it, you have to upgrade it, there's software, there's hardware, there's firmware, there's all of this stuff. I think it's going to be a collaboration of governments and tech agencies working together, but a new model has to be figured out.
Really going to put you on the spot now, Shailin, but Elaine Chao is here, the US Transportation Secretary. Is the decision, the conversation she's having with other ministers this week and with businesses and organizations, how different are those conversations to the ones she was having last year? Has this moved on for her and for the US in terms of how willing they are not just to listen, but actually to do something?
Yeah, I think that that Secretary Chao, through USDOT, has their AV 3.0. So they've sort of been going through this iteration, and I think what is really challenging, particularly at the federal level. I mean, all government tends to have a certain inertia, but at the federal level, it's the hardest to turn a big ship like that. And so, how do you take an agency that has regulators and focus on safety, and has been doing something since it was set up in the 1960s? And turn it into the 21st century agency. So I think she's been trying to do that. I think the conversations that she is having, I'll give you an example, the drone conversation, passenger delivery and freight delivery by drone was one that was sort of very conceptual a couple of years ago and is now looking at live deployment. So the pace of change is fantastic. I think she and other government leaders are trying to manage it, but it's really difficult because the conversation you have today could be outdated in a couple of years, and so you've got to try to stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, well, thank you. Indeed, and if anyone in the room is unsure about their future, entering the road infrastructure business now is really very exciting. But really, we are facing significant change in our jobs, new working methods, new business models that we have to understand and be part of. We have to be able to understand financial modeling much better than in the past, deal with legal issues, data, etc. It's become really complex. So we have to be able to do that in transport administrations, and we tackling with this. But at the same time, maybe this is really hardcore. We want to be part of fostering innovation, of course, because we talked about safety and other benefits earlier. But at the same time, we understand that we need to maintain white markings because autonomous vehicles need that. Okay, white markings, so we need to invest in that. Electric vehicles, or maybe we need to look into inductive technology. Okay, let's put that on the table as well. So we have to become much more adept at making decisions and sticking to those decisions using the most input that we can have. At the same time, we all know that road infrastructure is built for dozens, if not of years, if not more, if not centuries. So the issue here is how do we reconcile different time horizons? And that's indeed really tricky. And there's more further down, because if in a not too distant future, vehicles are going to be driven by robots rather than by humans, we can design roads differently, because robots don't behave the same as humans. You can drive vehicles faster, you can take a turn, much sharper turns, etc. So this is what we are really trying to do. This is why being involved in trials and initiatives in Europe, US, Asia, and anywhere, and sharing that in international organizations or here this week is really, really essential.
Okay, Christophe, I want to get a final word from you on the governance piece, the regulation, and from you as well, Jean-Baptiste. And then I want to open it up to our audience. Christophe, let's just get your thoughts on governments, on level playing fields, on how far we've got to go now.
The first point is actually what you just mentioned is the tender process of the different kind of countries or areas in the globe. And in Europe, we have a very strong European tender process, but even here, we are too much looking on price than on technology. Yeah, it's very price-driven. And furthermore, we are taking, as it is a global market, also global players into account by price and not by technology. And at the end, the solution is not working. A very good example is here next door. Everybody knows that one. And from the other side, we are dealing in 80 countries of the globe with partners and directly, and there are clearly natures of regions. For us, for SWACO, my Scandic countries are the early adopters. So they have a very good open regulation from the government to start new technology. 2020, there are no petrol cars allowed anymore in Norwegian. Yeah. Similar in Germany, DACH, we are very 150%. We need a perfect solution before we bring it into the market. We are normally last, but then perhaps we have the most developed one. Other areas like Middle East are really going on the innovation side with spending a lot of money into artificial intelligence and the modern systems and the fanciest command and control centers. We just won the Qatar Command and Control Center for the Football World Championship. There will be 14 stadiums. None is longer than 60 kilometers, and the spectators have the chance to see 3 games at one day. And we have to manage the traffic in between this and the parking. And they are really creative and innovative with solutions about it. And so every region has their certain nature to deal with these circumstances. The Asians are the picture of the future for us, where we can learn a lot, where we can also get the data about e-mobility, connected and autonomous driving. I was 2 weeks ago in Shanghai and I visited an artificial intelligence company, and they told me they will have level 5 autonomous driving in 2.5 years. If you tell this a German, he talks about 2035, 40, perhaps my son. So the understanding how fast regions are in their development is completely different, and that's why communication is the main key, and this is why this Congress is also
How far off is that in the US? Level 5, and do you believe that in China?
I've been hearing that level 5 autonomous is 2.5 years away for the last 5 years. And I'm not disputing that they believe that there. It's just we're 95% of the way to autonomous driving, but that last 5% is really, really hard. Just the basics of like merging, interaction with pedestrians and others. And in the US, the challenge for us is when I was in China, what I was told that if a Chinese person, this was from somebody there, was to be killed by an autonomous vehicle, they would view it as a contribution to the greater good. In the U.S., that would not be the way that it would be viewed. It would be a market stop. Autonomous vehicles are killing people, and so I don't think it's a couple of years away. The other thing on this piece, and we talk about the ministers, the other problem in the U.S. is it's a political system. So if I'm the Minister of Transportation and I pick a technology and 2 years later I'm found to have made a mistake, it's not, oh, good job on trying something new and it didn't work out. It's that person wasted public dollars, it was a bad investment, and they need to be booted out of office, and they need to resign. And so this is the other part that's more challenging, is the political dimension that comes in also makes it incredibly, it makes it incredibly hard for people to say, let's go out and try something new.
And very quickly, Jean-Baptiste, from Valio's perspective, when do you think vehicles will work fully as true enablers of smart cities?
As soon as they get fully connected.
Right,
No.
and give us a time frame on that.
Yes, because at that moment they will be really enabling vehicles to leverage all the electrification and automation connectivity to provide the global system. And I'm using your first sentence, saying we are going from vehicles that are a bit split to a global system or mechanism.
From a swarm of autonomous cars that tolerate each other.
I think to give you a time frame, it's more easy to give a time frame in about level 4 and 2025 of having good examples of level 4 working should be a reasonable time frame.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much. We'll come back because, but I think we've put a lot on the table there to get a discussion going with our audience as well. So I think there's some roving microphones. Please raise your hand, tell us where you're from, and the panel's all yours. Anyone? Have we touched on everything? No one has a question for the panel? No? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Ferry Schmidt, ANWB from the Netherlands. I was asking myself, what about vulnerable road users? We're talking about cars, connectivity, and improvement of safety. But what we see in the cities is that there's an enormous increase in population. People are pushed out of the car, transferred to walking and cycling. And to give you an idea, in the Netherlands, for the first time in history, more people died on a bicycle than in a car. So what's your aim on that one? Can you use connectivity to improve the safety of vulnerable road users?
So the ITS World Congress was in Copenhagen this year, and the thing I heard there all the time was 70% of trips in Copenhagen completed on bicycle, which is fantastic. And everybody says, well, of course they do, but 50 years ago, Copenhagen was a car-choked city, so the transition has been remarkable. In the US, when we look at the data around where the fatalities are going up, most of the fatalities now are on what we call vulnerable users of the system. Pedestrians, bicyclists, motorcyclists, because of distracted driving. And so connectivity, I think, is critical. So vehicle-to-vehicle communication, but we talk about V2X, there's no reason why there can't be vehicle-to-pedestrian communication, where there is, your cell phone that you're carrying on your bicycle can be communicating to an intersection, to vehicles. There's detection within intersections now that can detect cars, vehicles, pedestrians. So I think that connectivity is the key to safety for the vulnerable users on the system.
No, I think you're fully right. And just out of the room, you have a booth, and we're showing an example of fine air quality mapping that is based on a solution combining sensing solution embedded in vehicles and from the infrastructure, and then we provide a real-time model and calculation of the air quality in cities. And it completely makes sense to combine that with data gathered by people walking that have sensors and so on with them. I mean, parents working with their child and being in the park and being worried about the air quality in the park where they are, and also gathering data, and this is combined with the vehicles around that exactly know what is going on board, and with the infrastructure that is capturing what is a bit higher on the buildings and so on. So this completely makes sense. The only thing is there is a legal framework to open on that, because data gathered by individuals, you need to have a consent from them to send the data. So on all those topics, I mean, this is also to be taken in account. And then here again, I think cities have a role to play, because we're speaking about data that at the end are helping for better safety on road, better environment quality, better health quality in cities and so on. So here cities could have a role to organize a little bit, to push some solutions where we gather data from vehicles, infrastructure, individuals.
Okay, yeah, gentleman right there in the middle.
Thank you, Cathal Masterson from Transport Infrastructure Ireland. So, very interesting debate, and one of the thoughts that occurred to me is that infrastructure providers and agencies are struggling with budgets to do their current jobs. What type of ideas do you think will emerge to help us fund this type of investment going forward?
Patrick, why don't you take that one?
Well, actually, questions just like yours really help, to be honest, because it's a debate that we frequently have. Like, it's very interesting to be discussing about cooperative ITS and autonomous vehicles and electrification of roads, but I mentioned white markings earlier, and there's a significant shortfall in road infrastructure investment and road maintenance. And this is why discussions such as these really raise the profile of road infrastructure. And resilience has become an ever more important issue. And those are all on the table now. A few years ago, roads were a thing of the past. Now they're back on the table. And all the issues and projects and ambitions that come with that are, again, back on the table, including maintenance. There's a growing realization, and this is a positive thing in a way, that maintenance and possibly development of road network really has to be taken into account much more than it is now. Money will not, and funds will not appear out of the blue, but prioritization at government level, and maybe a monetization of some of the positive externalities of cooperative systems should be part of this.
Sure.
Just really quickly, for us, the vast majority of our funding for transportation comes from the gas tax, petrol tax, and I think one thing that we all agree is that with electrification, we're not going to have the gas tax much longer. So I think that connectivity is critical, because whatever we use to fund transportation coming next will be some sort of a road usage charge, a vehicle miles traveled charge. And so that, I think, is the next generation of funding. And I think the connectivity piece will be critical to making sure that people are paying for the system.
Yes, I just wanted to say something also quickly on that. I think we all have businesses that are running and that we need to make, because, well, this is the basic business we have, but we need also to look forward to the other ones that are coming. And on that note, certainly using existing technology for other usages and thinking from the beginning that you can diversify the way you use it is certainly one of the solutions that we should all have in mind. To give you just an example, we are providing solution for premium OEMs of automated parking, the car that is going by itself in the parking. To do that, you're using sensors, cameras, but the cameras and sensors are running all the time, or most of the time, and they are looking at the city around the vehicle, and all those data that you're getting from that, you can use them for something else, like knowing where are the parking spaces that are available or not, and provide that to the city traffic authority, so they can have in real time a view of where people can park or not. I mean, there are lots of options like that, and I think it's something that we all have in the energy sector. They exactly have the same problem. I mean, the operator that are having in charge of running the infrastructure, they need to modernize also, because now the energy production will be more distributed than before. So you need to integrate all those people that are providing energy to the grid. You need also to modernize that, and you were not classically funded by the state, or I mean, speaking for Europe, where the system is like that, for doing that. So they need to include in this maintenance and renewal of the infrastructure the way to integrate that new energy providers. But this is something they should do and we're doing also like that in the automotive sector, thinking that our technology can have different usages, and think about how, since the beginning, we can use that and leverage on that.
Okay, very good. Yeah, the gentleman at the front here. Yep, we'll go there, and then we'll go right there.
Neil Walker from a trade association, IBEC, in Dublin. There's previously been a reference to people not necessarily wanting to reveal where they are all the time. How, within Europe, can this level of communication be made compatible with the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, and also perhaps the emerging regulatory structure for e-privacy, which covers communications as opposed to holding of data?
Yeah, I don't know who wants to take that one, but it's an interesting question. You know, this idea of privacy and GDPR and then technology, which basically places everyone at all times. How do those two bits fit together? Go ahead.
I touched that point just before by saying if you're having a solution where you involve individuals, they need to consent to share the data. So for me, if basically today, if the service that is provided is valuable for them, they accept. When you have a smartphone, you accept because you think the app that you are downloading is useful for your daily life. So, and the other way to see that is when you have a solution that is maybe pushed by a public authority, a city or whatever, and you think this is bringing a valuable gain to the community, then people will consent also to share the data. I mean, in that sense, that's the starting point. Are people ready to share the data they own from themselves to the system and the solution?
So you don't see ever, and again, apologies if I'm getting this wrong, but you don't ever see this idea that someone gets in a driverless vehicle and decides to opt out of being located, i.e. not approving. Not ticking that approval box.
You should have the solution, the possibility to do that, but then you say, well, I'm using my vehicle with no automated driving function, or at least some basic automated...
No connected function, I guess, right?
But no connected function, and you can do that, and it should be possible, because if you want to do that, it's okay, but then you're thinking that the value that you're getting from being connected is not... compensating the fact that you're sharing your data. This is your private choice.
Small price to pay.
I mean, not sure that most of the people think like that, but if you want, you should be allowed to do that that way. Yeah. Clearly, yes.
I mean, ethically, this is actually a very interesting realm, this, I guess. Okay.
Yeah, I just think there's two layers to this, right? So I don't need to know who you are in order to make an improvement to the system, right? So if I know that you are driving at 40 kilometers an hour on a roadway approaching an intersection, that's enough for me as an operator to say, this is a data point, but not you. What the companies, a lot of private sector companies want to know, it's you like a pint of Guinness at a certain time, and that's what they want to market to you, not while you're driving, of course. But I think there's a way to anonymize the data so that we could take this entire room and make sure that we know. But what is really important, I think, that as we go from a congestion pricing standpoint, because I think that is the next, another next generation of operating the system more effectively. If you want to drive 40 kilometers an hour on a motorway in a city at peak time, I want to charge you more for that, and then I have to know who you are. So if you want to opt out of that at that point, then you're going to have to pay a lot more because we just need to operate the system more effectively.
Of course, you're not going to be driving, so maybe you can have a point. It'll be interesting to see how long it is before the brewers get into this discussion. Go ahead.
Just as a personal opinion, not something that we have worked on in my organization, I think it's we see that from a customer's point of view, there are many hurdles still to be overcome. Like there are many technologies available. Vehicles are probably going to be more expensive, at least in the first years. So there's lots of decisions to be made, and privacy is just one additional hurdle. So we have to be careful that it doesn't become the one that will make the decision tip on the okay. Let's keep out of it for a few years. Okay, we know that in some countries there's global data warehouses. Okay, those can be hacked probably. We know that in some countries or some companies have a tendency to market data that they were not supposed to. Happens every day. So, oh, by the way, we didn't tell you, but we sold your speed limit, your speed data to the insurance company, and maybe your premium will be increased. We didn't tell you about it, but it's for the greater good. I can see it coming. So this certainly has to be addressed head on. It's a very complex discussion. It certainly has to be addressed head on.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Gentleman right there. Yep.
Hello, it's Arne Bertzner, Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. To make V2V, V2I funding mechanisms, public policy interests work in the future, we need this kind of data clearinghouse, or however we may call it. Who runs that? Who operates that? And who has access to it, and to what parts?
Yeah, so who owns it? Who runs it? Who has access to it? I mean, it's a debate we've been having for many years in other areas, but who does? I mean, this is the big piece of the regulation governance discussion.
So I'll just start. I'll say that the data, and people talk about data. I mean, you know, we talk about big data, but from an operator's perspective, there's only certain data that I need in order to operate the system more effectively, and I think that data is generated by the public on public roads that were built with public funds for the most part. And so there's an argument to be made that that data should belong to public agencies. The problem with that for many states in the US is that we have open records laws. So if you crash and on the system in Colorado or Delaware, and now the state owns all of that data, well, now my lawyer is going to come and ask for the data. How fast were you driving? What were you doing? What was your location before? Were you using your phone? And it opens up a lot of litigation possibilities. The data security. I was a federal employee at the U.S. government. I got a letter 2 years after I left the government from OPM, Office of Personnel Management, saying my data had been hacked. And if they can hack OPM, they can hack into a lot of these places. So who owns it is not yet determined. And I think there's a lot of private sector companies who want to own it, but this needs to be very carefully worked out because there are layers of this onion that we haven't yet peeled away.
Yeah, go ahead. Gentleman right here in the front.
Thank you very much. Steve Phillips, Conference European Directors of Roads. And first, thank you to the ITF for organising a session that talks about connecting without always including the word automated, autonomous, or whatever. Now, meeting with my members just 2 weeks ago, so the CEOs, the General Directors of the Roads of Europe, and we were discussing many of these issues, and I think some of the topics that have been discussed. And one of the open questions we have now, so looking at this discussion, we put a great emphasis on environment alongside safety. I think that's the first one. It's not only safety, but part of the complication of the safety discussion, which goes back to my comment about connectivity, is not necessarily the same as automation, autonomous, or assisted. What is the views of the panel on the pathways? Because there seems to be this mantra that to get to Vision Zero, we need level 5. Now, I'm just questioning, there is another solution that maybe we can get to Vision Zero with level 2. And I want to know, if we look at the different pathways as we go forward, at what point will we reach Vision Zero, and do we need level 5 to do that?
Yeah, okay. So in a way, it kind of goes back to that quote from the beginning, you know, this swarm of autonomous cars that tolerate each other to this orchestrated transportation machine. Can we do the transportation, this connected piece necessarily without reaching the level 5 on the automation, I guess is the question, right? Yeah.
I mean, there's a possibility that we don't ever get to level 5 everywhere, just because of the level of connectivity that's needed. And again, I'll just speak for the Americas, but if you look at Canada, the United States, it's pretty vast. And in terms of connectivity and vehicle-to-vehicle communication, and the complexities, I come back to this. If you look at what is needed to go to full level 5, and we have 300 million vehicles in the fleet. So how do you have this mixed, connected, autonomous, fleet? It's a very complicated piece. And so I would say if level 5 is our nirvana for Vision Zero, we don't get there. And so I think that the most important thing that we can do now for the 300 million vehicles in our fleet is to say, let's get a standard for connecting the vehicles. Because that also opens up the aftermarket OEM piece, where now I can buy a dongle that plugs in to my vehicle, and now I'm connected, even though I'm driving a car that's 10 years old, 8 years old. And so I think there are multiple pathways that get us towards Vision Zero that don't involve full level 5 on every roadway across the world, because I don't think that's a realistic goal. Level 5 will be, it's not, again, in the United States, it's not 2.5 years away, and it'll be on low-speed grid network in cities with mass connectivity, and that's the first deployment, not across the entire fleet.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I completely agree and share that, because the only thing is that you're using an example where we involve human life. So, I mean, it's a bit difficult, and the public debate, as you've mentioned it, is behind is a complex debate, because you're saying we should always save one life. But the level of its investment of having complete 5G, it's so high. I mean, we believe, and it's the same for electrification, you should have a level of technology and infrastructure that is designed for the usage, or the main usage that is occurring where you are. There is no need to have fast charging station in cities for big SUVs, because people are not, I mean, it makes no sense to have big electric SUVs in cities. You can have a small electric vehicle for just going from your house to the school of your children, which is 5 kilometers away. I mean, it's the same for connectivity and the solutions that are dedicated for level 4 and safety. I mean, you don't need to have a full 5G infrastructure everywhere. Based on the main usage and the main needs you have, you can calibrate the infrastructure and the solution behind.
Okay. Yep. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, just stepping on this, I mean, we haven't talked about the technology for providing real-time data for creating then the use cases out of it and coming to connected, cooperated infrastructure. I'm not talking about autonomous and anything like that. And here in Europe, the discussion is very political. It's not going forward. Digitalization is the key thing. We can't come around it. And for digitalization, the key thing is fast and reliable data. The security we spoke about, the culture regarding security we spoke about regulation. The lawyers will find directly a solution for any case. They are very fast in finding a solution if they have the case. And but it starts with the technology, and as long as we don't have fast, reliable data in real time, we can't even come to the business cases and open it up, because it's too slow. And keep in mind, the infrastructure we are talking about is sometimes older than 25 years, so it's completely analog. And this is also another level we have to improve.
I mean, maybe I'm being unfair. You should try living in the part of London I live in. I mean, it's pretty poor, I've got to say. Yeah, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you. What I wanted to add to that is that if you talk about road safety, there's the vehicle, but there's also the driver and infrastructure. So, of course, we have to take that into account. And if we want to reach Vision Zero, we can't leave the driver and the infrastructure out of the picture, especially that since we know now that investment on maintenance of roads is insufficient. That's one thing. Something that we're probably going to see in the future is being more transparency about different levels of service on roads. We've talked about cities quite a lot in this panel, which is very relevant, but also what about interurban traffic? And then interurban traffic in remote areas. where some services, for example, for elderly people in Japan, there's a lot of talk about that. There will be huge demand for connected vehicles on this. And what type of service will the infrastructure be able to offer? That shouldn't be forgotten about road safety. And about road safety, again, I made the point earlier, but I think we shouldn't forget about that, is the low and middle income countries. Some of the services that we talk about connecting vehicles and to infrastructure, can be made available in low middle income countries as well. And it's very worthwhile, relevant, if we want to reach the Sustainable Development Goals set by the UN, to explore everything that we can do probably at lower cost options in those countries as well.
Okay, any other questions? Last call for questions. Yeah, right here, and then, yeah, we'll come back to you. Yeah, go ahead.
So, Ole Isaksson from Ericsson. I have a question, first a comment on the digitalization and the risk of deploying obsolete technology. I think definitely, yes, digitalization is going on widely in society, as everybody knows. I think we see a clear trend of going from, so to say, application or industry or sector-specific silo technology to a more horizontal technology. Every sector have the same challenge of getting real-time data and so forth. At the same time, I think that in transport we see regulators taking a very advanced role in defining specific technologies. For how long do you think that we can have or should have regulation in transport that will dictate specific technology to be in place for the length of the infrastructure?
I mean, so we've had toll transponders in the U.S. For 20 plus years, and you cannot drive across the United States with one transponder because we don't have interoperability. And it's even mandated by Congress that there should be interoperability. And so I think that at this nascent stage, and I can't speak to the future, and I think we need to be careful. We're sort of extrapolating from what we know now. But for now, unless you have a mandate that says automakers and OEMs and others need to use this technology or follow this pathway, you get fragmentation. And when you have fragmentation, then you don't get the benefits of those investments. So I would say for the near term, we all need to agree that this should be the direction that we're going, and government should be the ones mandating from a public safety perspective, this is why we need to do this. Okay, yep, question there. I could take this one and one final question if someone has. No, use the mic.
Sorry, just very quickly. I mean, talking about the detection, we talked about the detection of possible detection of bikes. But how do we do it with pedestrians? In my country, it would be considered totally unacceptable for my grandmother having to leave the house to carry her smartphone with her. And if she doesn't do it, if she forgets it, she's at the mercy of some vehicles that possibly cannot detect her, or she doesn't have the full safety level. How do we deal with that? Do we build that infrastructure, or what's the pathway here?
I think this can be completely managed by the vehicle. I mean, by the vehicle. I mean, for example, in Paris, you have now lots of small two-wheelers, rollers that are running. This wasn't the case 2 years ago, but the vehicle is learning. I mean, we have IA, deep learning, machine learning solution where the vehicle are learning fasting to recognize new situation, new road users, different road users, and I mean this is then updated in the system and shared via the different vehicles we have. I mean, this is I don't see that as a problem, and I don't think your grandma is supposed to have a smartphone to be safe in the street when you will have lots of AV. On the contrary, I mean, the vehicle is really taking part of that.
Okay. Yep. Very quickly here.
Just a quick question. Apart from my role in the Road Touring Club in the Netherlands, I also chair the European Road Assessment Programme. It's aimed at safety assessment of physical road infrastructure. I do that also globally. The question is, do you have any idea what kind of assessment criteria we should use to get SPI, safety performance indicators, on the connectivity of infrastructure? Because that's the future. I'm really interested in how you see that. Where is the essence of connectivity criteria to have a performance indicator for road safety.
And look, I'm going to use that question to get a final comment from all of you, actually, because, and that fits nicely into that, which I'll fold into a very sort of broad question from me. 5 years from now, when we're doing this connecting vehicles and infrastructure panel here in Leipzig, how different is the panel going to look? How different are the subjects that we're discussing going to be? So, and with that gentleman's question in mind, go ahead, you start, Jean-Baptiste.
I think in 5 years we will have a discussion where we will have already ecosystem that will work, valid use case that will be on the market and that will be financially sustainable, and we will certainly more discuss about the scale-up effect and the ability to use them in different countries, places, and so on. So interoperability will be a big issue, or more bigger issue than today, where we are more first, I think, from my perspective, better start trying to understand the market and the timing of rollout of those connectivity infrastructure and technologies. So my main message would be we should continue to try and have a framework, a legal framework, where we are supported to try, supported to be innovative completely innovative in the ecosystem, the way we finance it, the way we gather the players, the way we structured, the way the different road operators, OEMs, suppliers, M&O are working together.
Okay, Shin?
Yeah, so when you're going to build a project in the United States, on the public side, you have to go and do a safety benefit analysis, right? So we have a crash issue. Do we put a grade separation? Do we put a traffic light? Do we widen the road? What is that we do? And I think that 5 years from now, we're going to have a lot more deployments around connected vehicle technology, connected infrastructure, and it is my true belief that the return on investment of technology deployments will have a massive, will cause a massive reduction in crashes, will cause a massive uptick in throughput. And we're going to be 5 years from now sitting here saying, look at these specific locations that have deployed this technology and look at the benefits that they're accruing on a safety, environmental, and congestion benefit. And it'll be also this third dimension of, I think, vertical takeoff landing vehicles that are coming in. And it's another dimension to the to this transportation equation that we're talking about.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Patrick.
5 years down the road, we will certainly have defined levels of service on different road segments more clearly. Just like you have star rating in many parts of the world, we will have something similar for CITS services or whatever they're going to be called. So like people with a specific vehicle will know what they will get on this road or this city or that city. And something else that I think still unfortunately need to repeat, that resilience of transport systems will be an even higher item on the agenda. And we will, in 5 years, 5 years later, in Europe at least, we will have seen severe weather events that will have put maintenance and investment and how to make the best decisions, higher priorities on decision makers' agenda.
Okay, and to finish us off, Christoph.
Yes, in 5 years we will have a much greater difference between digitalized smart cities and classical analog cities. We will have open data in much more cities than we have it today. And through that we will see new business models for sure, and also new connections and rankings of what is priority of transport vehicles. For example, at the moment it's car, public transport, bike, e-scooter. In the future it could be e-scooter, bike, public transport, car. This changes the complete structure of the city, and the only thing which brings you forward is for sure if we all leave the silo thinking into a connected thinking and see it from a wider scope, learn from city who are early adopters and transfer this thinking, and not make yourself your own experience all the time again, because there is enough experience already globally existing on the typical challenges, and it will be much more KPI driven from a financial perspective, as mentioned, for example, also going into the direction of CO2 footsteps. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. Lots of food for thought there from the last hour and a half. I'm not going to say anything else except to thank this great panel and also to thank you for your questions. Thanks very much indeed, everybody.